Since human beings are said to be in the image of God in virtue of their having a nature that includes an intellect, they're in the image of God because they've got an intellect. They can understand and know. Such a nature, one with an intellect, is most in the image of God in virtue of being able most to imitate God. So he thinks of this ability on our parts to know as the most important part, maybe, of the image of God in human beings.
Today's subject is epistemology. How is it that we can know things? To what degree can we know anything? Plantinga seems to argue as if people knew things by some magical supernatural method with no hint of epistemology, justification, experience, or experiment. So, what is Plantinga's epistemology? What happens when Plantinga confronts an undecidable question he cannot answer? Or does he think there is no question he cannot answer? And what makes one question answerable and another not? I submit to you that when we face an unanswerable question, one that might have to remain forever unknowable, it is because we have confronted the inner limits.
And most of us would think, at least if we thought about it, that at least a function of our cognitive faculties, memory and the like, a function of these faculties is to provide us with true beliefs. That's what they're for. And we'd ordinarily think that when they're functioning properly, when there's no dysfunction or malfunction, anything like that, then for the most part, that's what they do. Of course, it's true that if, let's say, there are 5 witnesses to an auto accident, you might get 5 different stories. But there will be an underlying level of agreement.
Note how Plantinga hedged his assertion that his beliefs must be true. He speaks of the potential for dysfunction and malfunction and qualifies his statement with the phrase, "for the most part." He cannot claim absolute certainty any more than a naturalist. His argument is now about probability, and his real assertion is that evolution plus naturalism contain more probable wrongness than theism.
At least roughly on the location of the accident. It won't be that some thought it took place in China, but others thought it took place in Los Angeles.
It would be pretty hard to think you saw an accident in China if you were not in China and had never even been to China.
There will be agreement that there are such things as automobiles, that people use them to accomplish their purposes, which in the case of automobiles ordinarily involves going somewhere, that automobiles won't work well on the surface of the moon or the bottom of the ocean, that if you drop one out of a helicopter, it will ordinarily fall down rather than go up, and so on. All right.
A car falls at approximately 32 feet per second per second. That means, like most objects, not including things like feathers and sheets of paper, that once dropped, a car's falling speed increases by 32 feet every second. The first second, it falls 32 feet. The second second, it falls 64 feet. Third second, 96 feet, not allowing for wind resistance until you reach terminal velocity, which is when air resistance equals acceleration. Terminal velocity is approximately 120 miles per hour, and barring other factors, will be reached in 10 seconds. Every 1,000 feet after that takes 5 seconds to fall. The point I am trying to make here is that Plantinga's examples of the truths that we all think we know are almost all low-level common-sense scientific facts, not facts about God, philosophy, or metaphysics, where there is no agreement. All that was missing to show this was the scientific depth. Another example, Plantinga says that cars don't work on the moon or underwater. Well, the reason they don't is related to scientific knowledge, and it is because they need the oxygen found in air in order to ignite the gasoline in the pistons. However, whether we can say cars should work on the moon or not depends on how you define the word car. The new electric cars might well work on the moon if the driver wears a spacesuit. And is a moon buggy a car? And as far as cars working underwater, well, some do. What does it mean when Plantinga is wrong about the things he thinks we all know are true? As I said in part 1 of this series, our cognitive faculties have evolved to extract a certain kind of truth, if we can call it truth, which Plantinga here used as an example. But note what kind of truth that is. It's truth about material objects, cars, with weight and length and height and color and texture. Cars have more in common with rocks than they do with philosophical presuppositions. Let's call this kind of truth empirical truth, because the primary reason we feel that we know the truth about cars with such certainty is because we see cars every day. We also touch them, hear them, smell them, and most of us even drive them. Well, I call this an empirical truth because it is knowledge that comes to us through the senses. Please do not confuse that with an argument for some kind of epistemological theory of pure empiricism. I don't go in for that kind of narrow epistemology. I think we need almost all of the epistemological theories working together to arrive at the most probable truth. And even when we've got all of them working together, errors are possible. What I do believe is that empirical observation is our most fine-tuned cognitive faculty. And it was fine-tuned by evolution for survival purposes, and it is also at the root of our scientific theories and of naturalism itself.
So our assumption is that when our faculties function properly, then for the most part, not always, not when they're working at the very limits of their ability, as in some of the far reaches of contemporary physics, cosmology, for example, but for the most part, they will produce truth when they're functioning properly.
If our cognitive faculties were designed by God in His own image to produce truth, then why does the human race as a whole have such a history of error?
No other species makes mistakes as frequently as we do, about as broad an array of topics as we do, or with as consequential outcome as we do. If you look at human history, everywhere you look, you see mistake after mistake after mistake. It doesn't even really matter which branch of human history you look at. You can look at philosophy, science, medicine, mathematics, psychology, economics, religion, politics, and everywhere you turn, people are making mistakes up, down, left, right, and center. Historically speaking, people have been wrong far more often than they have been right. And this is something really I think we need to take to heart much more seriously than we have up to now. Because it really shouldn't surprise us if you think about it, because there simply are a lot more ways to be wrong than there are ways to be right.
But isn't there a problem here for the naturalist? At any rate, for the naturalist who thinks that we in our cognitive faculties have arrived on the scene after some billions of years of evolution by way of natural selection, genetic drift, and other blind processes, working on sources of genetic variation like random genetic mutation. Isn't there a problem there initially? I mean, if that's how you think of it, wouldn't you be sort of surprised at the idea that our faculties are, in fact, reliable?
If Plantinga is going to say that our cognitive faculties came from God and that God made them in such a way that they would be likely to produce truth in any given circumstance, then why did our ancestors get so many things wrong? Is Plantinga not surprised that, with few exceptions, it turns out that our cognitive faculties are not always reliable? Or has he never looked at the evidence from history and psychology? The problem here is that Plantinga is very vague on what he means by both cognitive faculties and by reliability. We have to break those concepts down to get at the real story. Remember, the only example of a cognitive faculty that he has given us so far was our empirical observation of cars. That kind of observation and pattern recognition represents only one cognitive faculty. In part 1, I asked if the cognitive faculties that led the Aztecs to sacrificing people to a sun god were reliable. Then I asked if the cognitive faculties they used to create a calendar were reliable. Most of us would say that whatever made the Aztecs think there was a god that wanted human hearts was in error. But their old Mayan calendar was impressively accurate. SisyphusRedeemed, in his video, again it's linked in the underbar, had this related example.
And Ptolemy is the father of ancient astronomy, and he put together an astronomical system which is amazingly powerful. It's so powerful you can actually use it to navigate from Portugal to New York City. That's a 3,000-mile journey, and land within 50 miles of your destination. No compass, no GPS. All you need is Ptolemy's system and a decent grasp of the star charts. And that's really incredibly useful tool in that respect. And it's made all the more impressive when you consider the fact that his system is fundamentally and completely mistaken, because Ptolemy thought the Earth was at the center of the solar system and the sun and all the planets were rotating around it. Now ask yourself really quickly, how is it possible that something that's that wrong can be that useful? And there's an important lesson to be learned there. Just because something is useful, just because something is pragmatic, does not mean that it's correct. Hold that lesson in mind as we continue to move forward.
If Darwinism is correct, if evolution is correct, if evolution and naturalism, their conjunction is correct, then the ultimate purpose of our cognitive faculties would be survival, or perhaps survival through childbearing, reproductive age, or perhaps maybe we should say their ultimate purpose would be the maximization of reproductive fitness. So if they have a purpose, that's what it is. Their purpose isn't to provide us with true beliefs, but to do this other thing, to maximize fitness.
That last short clip from Plantinga's lecture is one of the few things I agree with him about. Evolution did not give us cognitive faculties that would automatically get at the truth of things. We have no reason to expect naturalistic evolution to do that, and we have an abundance of evidence that it did not give us an automatic ticket to gaining true beliefs. However, that doesn't mean we can never get at certain kinds of truth. It's just not the kind of truth Plantinga wants to claim. Sure, we can be pretty confident that cars exist and that they have, for the most part, the properties we think they do, but that is a very limited kind of knowledge, and it doesn't in any way lead to the kind of knowledge of God and religion that Plantinga wants to claim. We can make observations and measure everything we can possibly measure, and that helps, but we can never observe everything, so that is not enough.
When you're trying to understand the universe, it's easy to think what you do is you make lots and lots of observations, you see what's there, and then you fit it all together into your grand picture. But the problem is, unless you have some sort of idea what the picture should be, you don't know what observations to make, you don't know what's significant. And throughout the history of science, every so often someone has to come up with a new mathematical idea.
Modern science has shown us a world far stranger than the ancients could ever have imagined. We don't really know if our model of this universe is true in any absolute sense because of the way science now works, through falsifiability. We can only say that our current view is less wrong than previous views. We expect new findings to change it because that is the way it always happens. It is a universe described by mathematical equations, and the mathematical descriptions are rooted in empirical measurements that are no longer made with human sensory organs. Our human senses were simply not good enough to discover that kind of truth, imperfect as it is. It may turn out, even with better instruments, that our human brains are not capable of fully understanding this strange universe. In my first Inner Limits video, Plantinga had said our inability to track truth would be a defeater for naturalism and evolution because we could not be sure anything we believed was true, including naturalism. But naturalism, especially methodological naturalism, doesn't have to be certain. It just has to be less wrong based on our best reasoning. Simply assuming that what you believe is true because you don't want to face the possibility of being wrong is not good reasoning. To do so not only goes against the combination of evolution and naturalism, it also goes against the evidence of history and experimental psychology. I do not think Plantinga knows much about the evidence from history and psychology, for he would have to deny it to be consistent. This is because history and psychology are telling us the same thing that naturalism and evolution are when it comes to the reliability of our beliefs. The evidence tells this story. We human beings seem to be very good at observing the world, measuring it, noting regularities, and then exploiting those regularities to our advantage. Evolution can explain the advantages of that. But we are terrible at deciphering the mechanisms that lie behind those regularities. And religion is an attempt at deciphering the unseen mechanisms behind the regularities. Since God cannot be measured, observed, or behave predictably, Plantinga cannot claim reliability for that kind of knowledge when he has only assumed the accuracy of observational, empirical, cognitive faculties that we all agree on. However, as Plantinga notes, this does indeed leave us naturalists with a problem. What exactly should we do in this situation if we want the most accurate beliefs about the underlying mechanisms we can possibly get? What kind of epistemology can we use in this situation we find ourselves in? Think about that, because that's the question I am going to leave you with until next time when I come back to give you my own answer. Leave a comment or video response on that, and I may use it in my next Inner Limits video.